Yeah, we're recording now, so we can start, Alexandra. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's session. We are so excited to have you here as we explore humanitarian to human, changing the way we welcome refugee claimants. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that everyone can see the presentation. Excellent. So really, we are so grateful for the opportunity to be here today and to present our recent community-based participatory research entitled Humanitarian to Human, Changing the Way We Welcome Refugee Claimants. This research was undertaken from an asset-based systems change framework with the purpose of informing various stakeholders who wish to know how a professionalized humanitarian system can become more human in its practice of refugee claimant welcome. Thank you, CARFs. Thank you, CARFs, for this opportunity and for the dynamic virtual program that you have compiled. Our panel looks forward to introducing this project, and we welcome discussion about how the research results may be applied at various system levels to enhance refugee claimant experiences. We'd like to begin with an Indigenous acknowledgement and respectfully acknowledging that we live, we work, and we welcome on the traditional and unceded land of the Coast Salish peoples, including the shared traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Though the histories are distinctive, commonalities do exist between refugee claimants and Indigenous communities in Canada, such as forced displacement, family separation, language and cultural oppression, colonization, and marginalization. We hold space for the inherent complexity and contradictions that emerge as we create safe refuge for newcomers on Indigenous lands. Both newcomer, refugee, and Indigenous voices must be heard as we take steps towards reconciliation, dignity, belonging, and justice. So who are we? Well, all of the research questions in this project emerged directly from community concerns and was supported by a large advisory panel that includes representation from law, government, refugee support, the UNHCR, and academic sectors. We're based in the Metro Vancouver area, and the 5 members of our presentation team today are made up of researchers and representatives from this research steering committee who collaboratively led this innovative project. My name is Alexandra Dawley, and I'm the lead research consultant with Dawley Consulting. I'm joined today with my colleagues Niwar Amin Obeid, who is the community-based researcher with Dawley Consulting. Also with us today is Jenny Francis, who's an instructor and research coordinator with Langara College, Karen Gelb, who's a social impact coach with Social Venture Partners Vancouver, and Loren, Balisky, who's the Director of Engagement at Kinbrace Community Society. So what will we cover today? Well, we'd like to talk to you about what inspired this research. What were our guiding questions and the project objectives? How did we apply an asset-based systems change framework? Why did we select community-based qualitative design and art-based research? And how did we apply these approaches to research? And possibly most interestingly and most importantly, we'll explore our findings with you in the themes of dignity, belonging, and well-being before talking about analysis of our findings, actionable recommendations, and emerging next steps and opportunities for future work. At the end of today's session, we'll have an opportunity for discussion and question and answers. Loren, the floor is yours.
Great, well, thank you. Good to be with all of you. And it's been my privilege to work on this project with a diverse group of wonderful people here in Metro Vancouver, but also some representatives coming from across Canada as well. The research project was born out of Kinbrace's interest in exploring a number of interlocking issues or systems that impact refugee claimants. Kinbrace is a community that welcomes refugee claimants with housing, education, and support. The name itself is the conjoining of two words, kinship and embrace. I'm sure everybody on this panel knows, but just to be clear, refugee claimants are people who are seeking refugee protection in Canada. They're also known as asylum claimants or asylum seekers. And our dream as an organization for each refugee claimant is a world of welcome, a community of belonging, and a life of opportunity. This particular research project was made possible through a Develop grant from the Vancouver Foundation, one of their Systems Change grant streams. Develop grants are short-term grants that help teams or the community to unpack a complex issue and to identify systemic behaviors that have created that issue or that are holding that issue in place. And so we've been grateful to have this grant to move forward. In a world increasingly marked by forced displacement, we felt compelled to ask the question, what would a values-based, human-centered, and transformational welcome for and with people seeking refuge and protection in Canada look like? We felt that answering this question could lead us to a more dignified welcome of refugee claimants, increase the capacity to welcome those seeking asylum, and create transformative communities where refugee claimants and Canadians flourish together. Just a quick overview of refugee claimants in BC. Thousands do make refugee claims in BC annually. And from the Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada and Border Services Agency Canada.ca website, we've seen an increase over the years of refugee claimants over the years. In 2013, there was a reported total of 535 refugee claimants processed by CBSA and IRCC in BC. In 2019, 3,850. And even despite the border closures during the global pandemic, in 2020, there were 2,160 refugee claimants. And we know these are small numbers, perhaps compared to Ontario and Quebec, and yet each of these is a person and of concern. The guiding questions that we used as we entered into this research. First, refugee claimants interact with service providers, government agencies, and the general public. What practices, postures, places do refugee claimants witness or experience that make their days brighter and or improve their quality of life? So that was one sort of guiding question. The second, which attitudes or values do refugee claimants appreciate in their interactions with service providers, government agencies, and the public because they promote feelings of safety, inclusion, and belonging? Finally, acknowledging the complex, challenging terrain refugee claimants navigate in their quest for refugee protection, where and when, even just for a moment, do they witness or experience rest, confidence, acceptance, empowerment, respect, encouragement, success, hope, a sense of opportunity, the lightness of spirit, the feeling of being affirmed? So these were the guiding questions. Project objectives were threefold. One, to acquire an understanding of the experiences of refugee claimants during the months prior to their refugee hearings that affirm their dignity, belonging, and overall sense of well-being. The second objective was to identify actions that residents of Canada can take to amplify dignity, belonging, and overall sense of well-being of and for refugee claimants. Then finally, to share those findings and a resulting report as part of an action plan towards systemic change. Jenny, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Loren and Alexandra. So I'm just going to say a little bit about our framework and approach. So a bit about our methodology. So we applied an asset-based systems change framework to this project. So systems change refers to shifting systemic forces, which include structures, practices, policies, resource flows, power dynamics, and mindsets that can create problems in society. We took an asset-based perspective, and that refers to long-term transformative rather than incremental change that's centered on recognizing existing strengths as areas for expansion and development. So that means that instead of asking our research participants to recount their challenges or the challenges that they faced, or to name the barriers that they struggled with, we instead asked people where they encounter dignity, empowerment, and mutuality from the time of their arrival. I'm just going to ask if everybody could mute their mics, just so everybody can hear. So this type of systemic change that we're working for towards was aimed at amplifying the bright spots and the places where, like Loren was just saying, where refugee claimants experience dignity, empowerment, and mutuality. And we've included the voices of refugee claimants to ensure that we are able to achieve sustained systemic change that really takes into account the perspectives of the people who are most affected. At the same time, considering the multifaceted nature of systemic change, that also requires the participation of actors from many different positions or locations within the system. So that includes stakeholders from public, nonprofit, philanthropic, academic, or private institutions, as well as community groups and individuals. Do you want to forward the slide? Great. So this chart depicts 6 interdependent systemic conditions, and you can see that they're divided into 3 categories. So explicit structural change would address policies, practices, and resource flows. In the middle, we have relational change. So that's focusing on relationships and connections, which include power dynamics. And then at the bottom, we have more implicit systemic change. So that's focusing on mental models. So obviously conditions from each of these 3 categories, well, maybe it's not obvious, but conditions in each of these three categories could be independently defined, measured, and targeted, but it's also important to recognize that they're always interacting with each other. And it's these conditions that in turn underpin the systemic behaviors that we're really focusing on in this project. So in this project, we're focusing at changing 3 systemic approaches, I guess you could say. One is the humanitarian approach that doesn't always adequately address questions of power and neocolonialism that can be easily exploited in the context of forced displacement. Second, the charitable mindset that focuses on charity rather than dignity and justice. And then finally, the organizational model in which funding and reporting paradigms often focus on organizational efficiencies rather than actual human need. So systems are obviously very complicated, and so systems change is not really about achieving linear, sequential, and contained solutions in the same way that traditional problem solving or policy approaches might take. Rather, this approach includes iterative and ongoing processes of interrogation to expand on the successes and hopefully shift the current undesirable state to a future more desirable state. So if you could just go back to that chart for 1 second. So at the bottom of the triangle, there it is the mental models or the implicit conditions. And these are arguably harder to get at and change, but can have a huge impact. And I think this is where our project is really strong, is getting at that aspect. And so building on that, I would like to say a little bit about our qualitative approach. So as Alexandra mentioned briefly earlier, this research employs a qualitative, community-based approach, and all of our research questions that Loren just went through emerge directly from community concerns. So I wanted to just let you know 3 key ways in which community members participated and contributed to guiding this project. So first of all, the project began with the creation of a research steering committee comprised of people with lived refugee claimant experience. We had people from municipal, provincial, and federal government. We had service providing organizations, including housing providers. We also had academics and the UN Refugee Agency. So the Refugee Steering Committee was sort of contributed to the overarching design and implementation of the project. Second, a specialized team of 3 people with diverse refugee claimant lived experience formed a community-based advisory team. And they provided really critical feedback on the specific tools used in the project. So interview prompts and the poetry and prose components that Niwar will talk about in a second. We also applied an age, gender, and diversity approach while incorporating a variety of voices at the forefront of our research design. And then finally, I just mentioned Niwar. He is the community-based researcher who provided just incredible insight and leadership to this project. He also applied his professional writing skills and drew from his own experience of the Canadian refugee system. So the last thing I'm going to say before I turn it over to Niwar to speak a little bit more specifically about the methods that we used, I'll just mention that we chose a qualitative research design because we felt like that would enable us to get at the dignity, empowerment, and mutuality experiences better than a quantitative study would. We limited the number of participants to 23. And as you're going to see when we share our findings, this allowed us to access really new and richly textured information that we wouldn't have been able to gather otherwise. So now I'm going to turn it over to Niwar to share a bit about our specific methods. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Hi, everyone. My name is Niwar. I'm a community-based researcher. I can tell that this research project was very eye-opening and inspiring for me as a refugee claimant. The project represents the shared experiences of 23 participants, all of which arrived in Canada in 2013 or later and have lived refugee claimant experience, current or former. An age, gender diversity approach was applied, and there was some overlap between participants who participated in one-on-one interviews and also decided to participate in the writing and or visual art submissions. And participants represented 13 different countries, including people from BC's top 5 refugee claimant countries of origins. They were between the age of 16 to 66. They included individuals who self-identify as living with a disability, and included 12 male, 10 female, and 1 non-binary individuals. And they had diverse sexual orientations and made a combination of inland and port of entry refugee claims, all of them living in Metro Vancouver, Fraser Valley, and Vancouver Island. And the project elements it contains listening sessions, and the first research phase was listening sessions, and throughout this phase, 2101 listening sessions were facilitated between June and September 2021. Our sampling was purposive. Participants were invited based on virtue of their capacity to provide meaning and in-depth information, as well as ensuring an AGD approach and diversity, reflecting where the largest number of refugee claimants in British Columbia are from. A strong rapport was established with each participant, and a semi-structured approach was utilized, allowing for open-ended questions that promoted conversational flow, discussion, producing very rich data. And also sessions were held both virtually and in person following COVID-19 protocols as preferred by the participants. The second project element of this research was creative writing workshops, which included sessions of poetry and prose writing. So phase two and three utilized an arts-based research approach as defined by Baron and Eisner, the conscious pursuit of expressive form in the service of understanding. This was more of an implicit model. These two phases held the objective of creating space for storytelling and visual creative expression to share feelings and nuanced experiences of how refugee claimants encountered moments of dignity, empowerment, belonging, and well-being from the time of submitting their refugee claim up to their hearing date. And this resulted in a wide range of both implicit and explicit encounters and experiences with systemic forces and within systems shared by participants in a way that created empathy and transcended the everyday question and answer methods. Two creative writing workshops were held in person on July 31st, which was poetry, first workshop, and the second one was prose, held in August 7th. Both include 9 participants, led by me, the community-based researcher. During this time, I witnessed the participants' desire to be creative, to connect and read and expand their own worldviews and to enhance each other's, their own writing skills, while also elaborating and applying writing as a method of self-expression. Following the workshops, participants had the opportunity to submit poetry and short stories to be included within this report anonymously if preferred by the participant. And they exchanged feedback and their views during the workshops and after the workshops. And later we received 12 writing submissions and 10 selected for inclusion within this report. All pieces reflect on the participants encountering policies, practices, resource flows, relationships and connections, power dynamics and habits of thought, deeply held beliefs and assumptions. While the listening sessions tended to focus on the explicit, what makes the findings from the creative writing sessions unique are the ways they're centered on the semi-explicit and implicit areas, relationships, connections, power dynamics, and mental models. The poetry created through this approach provides a unique window into the mind of the participants, and as that picture is seen, deeper connection is made, making it possible for us to better empathize the experiences of others, namely the refugees. Such empathy is a necessary condition to reach deep forms of understanding and meaning. Next slide. And the third project element comprised visual art submissions. And we had a call for visual art submissions circulated amongst members of the refugee claimant community from August 25th to September 15th. The theme of this element indicated was intentionally left wide for the artists to shape, which helped to allow for open interpretation by participants, with the invitation simply inviting participants to create art that explores dignity, belonging, well-being, or mutual transformation. 99 photographs, drawings, paintings, and digital creations were shared, 7 of which are included in this report. All art submissions were submitted via photographs of their works, with their originals retained, of course, by the participants. Alexandra, you might want to move to findings.
Perfect. Thank you, Niwar. So it's a very exciting project, and as you can see, we took a fairly innovative approach to be incorporating a mix of the qualitative interviews, but also qualitative research through art and writing, which we're very excited about, and we feel that the results have been quite robust. As I begin to talk about findings, I'd just like to start by saying that as refugee claimants navigate the complex, anxiety-provoking, and at times heartbreaking terrain in their quest for refugee protection, there are a wide variety of both explicit and implicit structural conditions that they face, experience, and exist within. The brutal realities of trauma and systemic issues, such as a lack of affordable housing, racism and marginalization, employment barriers, long processing times, long waits to get work permits, challenges in accessing mental and physical health supports, as well as other barriers that are explicitly faced by refugee claimants across BC, is well documented. So we're not negating, discounting, or ignoring the magnitude of struggles that are faced and the systemic barriers that refugee claimants are up against. Rather, this research intends to employ a different angle. We believe that now is a time for multi-level re-envisioning of our system of protection that welcomes and centers on human dignity, belonging, and the well-being of all people who are seeking protection in Canada. The unique experiences that are shared throughout the listening sessions, poetry, prose, and visual art submissions clearly illuminate system conditions that refugee claimants witness, experience, and create that makes their days brighter, that builds essential interpersonal supports and connections, and improves quality of life and experiences of welcome in Canada. Although all of these conditions are interdependent, they can also be independently defined, measured, and we believe targeted for change. All of our findings have been divided into 3 overarching themes: dignity, belonging, and well-being. So to begin, let's start with dignity. While through all phases of our research, the following areas repeatedly emerged from the refugee claimant participants: inclusion, choice, control. To be dignified means to be clean, to have the opportunity to practice self-care, privacy, freedom, safe housing, independence, communication. To be dignified is to have empathy, to experience empathy, for you to see me for me, to have access to quality, sustained employment, and to essentially receive respect. So Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. At its core, human dignity is the belief that all people are deserving of respect, safety, tolerance, and understanding because they are solely due to the fact that they are human. There is no human right more fundamental than being safe or seeking protection. And this process must be rooted in dignity. Throughout the listening sessions, poetry, prose, and visual art submissions, the belief that the restoration of dignity is possible and opportunities for enhancing our protection system so that it centers on dignity for refugee claimants was widely conveyed. Areas where dignity came up throughout our research include experiences with a first point of contact in Canada, particularly for those who have crossed irregularly, and initial interactions between CBSA and the RCMP are massively formative in their perspective towards Canada. Secondly, refugee claimants' relationship with their lawyers and their sense of clarity towards the refugee claim process, a sense of justice and fairness within this process, had significant impact on how they experienced and reflected on belonging, and dignity. The connection, relationship, and tone from service providing organizations significantly impacts the dignity of refugee claimants in Canada. Dignity was found within the resilience and determination to build a life in safety that has purpose and meaning. A deeply held belief, both internally and externally, that a quality future in safety that has prosperity and connection, to believe that that is possible was centered to someone's dignity. Also, employment and self-reliance. To be able to meet one's basic needs, ideally independently, and at least with a sense of decision-making and agency. So rather than receiving just blanket donations, receiving a gift card and being able to purchase for your family, or ideally being able to afford and to support family through your own means. And finally, developing English language skills and being able to communicate one's needs is essential in almost all elements of dignity. To be able to establish social networks, to express what you need. Of course, possible without English, but made so much more possible with English or French. So as you can see, all of these areas that I've mentioned range between the explicit and the implicit. There's different systems and systemic forces that are apparent within each of the details that I've indicated here, as brought up by the refugee claimant participants. I'd like to draw from the listening sessions. One participant from the Middle East reflected on her fears of crossing irregularly into Canada. She felt like a criminal, like she was doing something wrong. This was followed by her interaction with the RCMP, which was rooted in dignity and respect. The people at the RCMP really showed sympathy, and I never felt discriminated against while crossing into Canada, even though it was not an official crossing. This individual recounted tripping while crossing at the border, and she hurt her knee, but she promptly received medical treatment and a strong level of respect, food, snacks, and care from the female officers. So here we see two interesting conflicting concepts, two different systemic forces that may be considered to be against each other. Due to the Safe Third Country Agreement and other reasons, many people do not feel comfortable to cross into Canada through official border crossings. However, when you cross irregularly to pursue your human right of seeking protection, you may feel that you are illegal, that you're doing something wrong. To be greeted by the CBSA or the RCMP and detained, this can have a significant impact on the perspective and the initial experiences of people while they're seeking welcome and refuge in Canada. We'll discuss this in a little bit more detail later on. Another individual spent her first week in a low barrier shelter before connecting with the settlement agency and then being referred to a transition home. She reflected on the psychological sensation of not being able to shower. She was frightened by the heavy drug use and the brutally racist comments and feedback that she received in the shelter. She was scared to eat the food that she was provided with. She felt uncomfortable sleeping at night, and she felt emotionally and physically at risk. Yet she felt uncomfortable and unsure of where to turn for support and guidance. And she really was struggling emotionally. However, she then reflects on a different experience. Following this time in the shelter, she connected with the settlement agency and received a referral to a refugee claimant transition home. This experience was significantly different, and she described a safe, private, clean space that she could once again focus on her legal case and, bask in my joy with good people and just be human again. So as you can see, there's several different systemic forces at play that are impacting the dignity of this individual and many others that we interviewed throughout this process. Niwar, I'll pass it over to you to discuss dignity, poetry, and prose.
Thank you, Alexandra. So I was very thrilled to be conducting the workshop, creative writing workshop. We had 2 sessions, and it contained a variety of writing exercises that provoked the writing thoughts and ideas of the emerging writers in the workshop. And I was happy to see that all of them connecting and smoothly flowing with the energy in the safe and comfortable space in the workshop. So in the context of the workshop, the participants manifested the shared sense of dignity through their interaction, as well as their ideas on writing in exile. And more importantly, the emerging writers draw on their experiences as refugee claimants, revealing moments of resistance and perseverance, self-esteem and pride. For instance, a young female poet ends her poem Togetherness with the following lines: "For the pain taught me to walk in a different journey, stronger." There is a sense of loss, nostalgia, and gratitude woven together in the poem, and the poet reached a point where she steers away from her past and becomes committed to learning from her suffering, culminating in a moment of endurance and dignity. She witnesses a meaningful moment of togetherness while getting stronger on her new journey. And in the second example of the poem on the slide, I would love to read. It's by a female poet who criticizes her partner for not demonstrating courtesy. "We smoke a cigarette. I stare at your fingers. I condemn them for not having learned to light a cigarette for women first. I wish men in your neighborhood had lit cigarettes for women. I wish back home women smokers weren't judged as whores. I have much to do, a duty too hard, the duty of educating you in a free country, you, the Eastern man. For a month, my mission is teaching you how to first, before yourself, light a cigarette for me." This bears a very rebellious feminist character. The poet takes upon herself the duty of teaching her partner how to dispose of the old stereotypes from back home and adopt better qualities in the new place. And this apparently shows that the poet is determined to reclaim the power and dignity she had lacked in her country of origin. Alexandra, you might want to.
Thank you, Niwar. Thank you for introducing the poetry and prose. And as you can see, this is one example of many of the powerful results of people sharing their experiences with us in direct and indirect ways. As we begin to introduce art, the visual art component of this research, I'd like to preface it by saying that we provided the artists with an opportunity to either share a description of their art pieces or to not, leaving it to the subjectivity of the viewer. We want to provide a visual image that people can then think about, to consider their own background and their own role and the ways that they may be able to impact refugee claimants. So I'd like to begin by saying that, and next I'll introduce our first image representing dignity. This piece is called Untitled. It was created by pencil on paper by a participant during her journey through the refugee claim process. She believes that it represents dignity. Another piece, much different than the first, includes colors, and colors that are reminiscent of their country of origin, and so many different components from heart to paper. And this is called Indignity. It's acrylic on paper, created from a participant in 2021. One piece that's powerful about the use of art in art-based research is its ability to transcend linguistic barriers and, as Niwar mentioned, the everyday question-answer mode of information sharing. Next, I'd like to explore the topic of belonging. Nearly all participants described belonging as maintaining social bonds with one's ethnic community or folks with shared cultural background, or areas that they otherwise associate as being from the same community. So specifically, as we were talking to members of the LGBTQ+ community, some expressed a discomfort of connecting with people from their country of origin. However, they find community and shared community with people who may also be refugee claimants for similar reasons, or other members of the LGBT community or members of the wider community. These meaningful ties and connections are critical to experiences of belonging for refugee claimants. Next, several refugee claimants, particularly those without family or close existing friendships in Canada, recognize deep personal bonds, sense of understanding, and a system of support from service-providing organizations and other more formal community hubs. So we're talking about settlement agencies, transition homes, counseling groups, etc. A very meaningful sense of belonging was found for individuals who have a closeness with family, close friends, one spouse, or if they had a baby in Canada. It created a whole different level of belonging towards each other and towards Canada as a state. The process of learning English and emerging with a strengthened communication style was also identified in the area of belonging. And many folks also talked about how in Canada, they experienced people are friendly, yet not their friends. When they could break through that layer of friendliness into an actual friendship, a sense of belonging was established. Belonging is also experienced through meaningful opportunities to give back and to contribute, especially within formal structures, volunteer pathways, in meaningful ways that are actually drawing from their skill sets, their backgrounds, and the passions that they bring with them to Canada. Belonging is also found in employment and the ability to provide for oneself and one's family. In the later stages of the scope of this research, belonging was found in a positive decision on their refugee claim. And not just that process, but also the physical receipt of their permanent residence card. Niwar?
Yes, thank you, Alexandra. So belonging is a very vital yet inconsistent feeling or emotion throughout the journey of the refugees. And in the context of the workshop, participants were encouraged to think of those moments where they felt deeply connected to this land, or if there were any memories that reminded them that they were a part of a bigger, larger group or larger community. So here's one example, a poem. I'll be reading it for you. This is an excerpt from a larger poem. Here on the shore of a new land, I pitch a tent, a nest from the straws of childhood dreams. I plant my mother's smile on it and let the child in me go out and play with geese and seagulls. I let the child in me build a castle, call it home. It seems that as a person with a complicated past and rich history, the poet seems to be striving for a peaceful space where they can reinvent themselves while at the same time bearing some of their heritage that is still powerful and meaningful to their present. And this indicates the potential merging of memories and future visions realized in the new place. As Alexandra mentioned, that belonging could indicate different meanings. Of course, it could be ties to the place, physical place, or it could be the powerful presence of a friend, family, or partner. So in a story titled The Woman Jealous, a writer tells a story of a person who is depressive disorders in early times of their arrival came to an end after they bump into a loving musician. And this is the last part of the story. It sounds like we have a lot in common. I shouldn't have bought the rope. Here I am. Instead of the rope to hang myself on, I'm hugging the woman's legs tight like a cello. I look out the window and see the world opening up itself for me. This is a very powerful example of how a person can impact one's life and sense of belongingness. As social beings, we are further encouraged to create spaces where refugees can meet, support each other, and make meaningful connections. Alexandra?
Thank you, Niwar.
Thank you.
So, as you can see, this has been a powerful experience, both within the process of the participants attending the creative writing workshops, where they were part of a larger group and they were reminded that they have community, that their perspectives matter and that they're being heard, as well as the outcome, which is clearly quite powerful. I'd also like to reflect on the listening session. So several participants expressed the significant impact that service providing organizations such as settlement agencies and transition homes had on them. Through these connections, several participants expressed experiencing emotional support, guidance, and individual connection. So it's not seeing the agency as an agency, not seeing the group as a group, but also the individual people who build up those groups and those structures. One participant, a woman from Africa, expressed, "I feel so connected when I get help from people in organizations. Because of these wonderful people I have come to know through NGOs, I feel like home, like I have been here for 1,000 years." Another participant, a man from Southeast Asia, reflected on a community picnic as an experience that brought him a sense of belonging in more ways than one, expressing, "The invitation made a lasting impression. Surrounded by everyone that night, for the first time in a long time, I was seen, no longer alone. It was like a family reunion, despite being here without family. I was asked to volunteer on the coordinating committee for the next one. Now I have helped coordinate 3 with my team. I know what people are facing and I can help." And finally, again, the components of belonging represented through art. This piece is entitled Inner Child. It's charcoal on canvas and was created through a participant of this program, reflecting on her personal experiences of belonging while navigating the refugee claim process. In contrast, this bright and more lively, interconnected piece of art was untitled. It's acrylic on paper, again, created by a participant of this project in 2021. The next category, the next theme that emerged throughout our research is that of well-being. And words that came up when refugee claimant participants were describing well-being included physical strength, mental health, parks, calm beaches, running, writing and reading, watching TV to improve English, counseling, group therapy, medication, healing, justice, and entitled to safety. The World Health Organization defines well-being as a state in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to contribute to his or her own community, While exploring well-being, participants reflected on a multitude of determinants and a multitude of systemic factors that impact one's experience of well-being. The first that emerged were a strong sense of security, justice, and freedom in the new place. Participants identified the multifaceted nature of health and well-being, such as tangible access to programs and practices to enhance one's own mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health and well-being. And when we talk about tangible access to programs, we mean it in both an implicit and an explicit sense. Explicitly having access, that they can register, attend a program, afford to attend a program, physically go to a program, but also implicitly. When we look at the areas of depression or trauma or anxiety or different factors that emerge throughout the refugee claim process, people often found themselves self-isolating, lonely. So we see that it's multidimensional and quite nuanced experiences. Purposefulness significantly impacts refugee claimant experiences of well-being. Nature and place, as well as creative outlets, pursuing dreams and practicing hobbies. And this is something that we recognized both in the outcome, but also in the input of the research design, as Niwar mentioned, throughout the creative writing workshops. Well-being also was identified as expanding one's own level of resilience. To be an active contributor, a leader, a valued community member, regarded as a knowledge holder, a professional, a volunteer, not only a beneficiary of services. So during our listening sessions, several examples of what I've just indicated came forward. I'd like to draw your attention to two in particular. Firstly, a young participant from the Middle East was motivated to perform well in school here in Canada. She was driven by a promise that she made to a friend who died in a bomb explosion at an educational center in her home country. In a letter, she wrote to him, "I am here and I make a promise. If I am studying 1% for me, I'll add another 2% for you. That means I will push it to the limit." Another refugee claimant who is a singer expressed, "Music for me has been a therapy. Settlement agencies have played a crucial part in my social and emotional life by inviting me to music events and to perform. Regarding her music, she says, I intend to use it to advocate to help not only claimants, but anyone who has been through abuse." So as you can see here, these two examples include a multitude of different dimensions, layers, and systemic forces. Niwar?
Thank you. So as you can see, well-being, the sense of well-being was one of the overarching themes in the writings of the emerging writers in the workshop. And this is evidenced in their struggle for freedom, sense of justice and security, and their healing journey, whether spiritual, psychological, or physical. We have a story, an excerpt here. I'll be reading the whole story here, which is very short. It's titled "The Passport." The writer tells about the insignificance of his passport and how restrained his freedom used to be in his home country. And he describes his current situation as such. The passport. The immigration officer at CBSA received my file and asked me to wait. After 20 minutes, he returned, looking empathetic. He handed me a few documents, asked me for some signatures, and then gave me instructions on what to do next. I walked out of the building and went to a nearby Tim Hortons. While sipping my coffee at a corner table, I stared at the snowbanks outside and reflected on the last days in my home country. Precisely the moments my plane from Erbil took off. I looked down at those magnificent mountains below, and for the first time I felt I was shedding my skin. Being from Kurdistan, I never felt what part of me belongs to Iraq. I carry an Iraqi passport that is no different from the worth of a potato. Those borders were defined a century ago, and I never understood why all of my people should suffer the repercussions of some stupid agreement made between allies after the First World War. Those colonialists who split the lands and went home. Being born within Iraqi borders was a curse. My parents, their parents, and their grandparents, all of them had to pay the price. I decided not to, so I moved. I moved to Canada. They have seized my passport, and I care not the least. That my passport was like a stain on my face. Wherever I traveled, the passport was the only thing that mattered, not my personality, not my mannerisms, history, qualifications, competencies, resume, or anything else of my human aspect. Now I don't have a passport, but I am in Canada, the land of my dreams. It is true that all refugee claimants work with their lawyers to write a story. Being a writer, I knew how to write my story in the best of ways. I knew there was no place for fiction, that everything had to be supported by evidence. All that happened to me was fresh in the memory, and the lawyer was happy that I wrote an incredible story for him. What happened to me back in Iraq may sound like fiction to a Canadian resident whose reality is utterly different. Here I was sharing a story that was going to define me forever. I sometimes envy Canadians who were born and brought up in this free country, but I am also proud of my past experiences and struggle. I can rewrite my story, yes. I can change my destiny. I'm not a motionless tree, but I can be its meaning. I can give all that I have, share all that I learned. I wake up every day and tell myself, today is all that I have. I'm sipping my coffee, and I don't know for how long I won't be able to move out of this country. Yet I am content because I know I can work. I can count on my skills. I can count on the compassion of the people around me. I'm looking at a plane far above in the blue sky. Perhaps someday I'll get a Canadian passport, perhaps not. When I do, I'll travel around the world, and that's maybe when I will taste the freedom I lacked back home. I think this the theme of belongingness to the new place is pretty clear in the story. I'd love to move on to the poem called Dance of Freedom, written by a female poet that describes her journey to Canada in a very compelling metaphors. It's raining, not reminiscing about homeland. Our nights become wounds, and the new homeland teaches us how to dance. Past is a wound. In an Italian bar, a Mexican dancer wearing a big hat curses the wound. We, the refugees, where are the wounds that lie within us? A Chinese bartender fills my glass. In memory of war, I raise it. A toast for the martyrs who never got to say their goodbyes. Where are the wounds that lie within us? Maybe on my back, where the map of home is tattooed. From behind, Mexican dancer pulls me by the waist, invites me to tango. Homeland becomes the dancer in whose arms I get drunk. In a free night, on a free street, I thread songs of freedom. I sing, you, my freedom, mi amor. The man I have been seeking for 3 years, dance with me and tell me, where are the wounds that lie within us? Here, my skirts have got shorter. My imagination widened. My home has become smaller. My dreams bigger. As it can be seen that the persona of the poem or the poet seems to have struggled a lot overcoming her past and the tragedy attached to their memories. Music and dancing in a multicultural space where she witnesses people of different origins celebrating love and freedom. She also learns to let go of the past, learns to treasure her new home and her new company. This is an example of well-being of a refugee whose physical appearances or house are not limitations and whose imagination and dreams are liberated in the new place. Alexandra, you want to take the lead?
Thank you, Niwar. As we look at the visual art that was submitted in the area of well-being, I'd like to share a piece called Trapped. This is a mixed media visual art created by Ashki Shakur here for this project in 2021. Ashki was not only comfortable with her identity being shared, but also provided us with some insights of what this piece means to her. She says, I created Trapped to show two different expressions, normal and anxious. Trapped highlights how I felt internally under red light and how I showed myself externally under blue light. All my life, I've had to act normal, even when I was filled with anger and anxiety, since I wasn't allowed to attend school back home because of my gender. Trapped is important to me because it made me realize how I was forced to show a normal face every day, and I couldn't stand up for my education. Lastly, Trapped taught me that if I did not go through my journey, I would not be the person who not only stands up for myself today, but also advocates for others. And the final piece of visual art that I'll share with you today is entitled The Lion in Me. This is a digital art piece that was created for by a participant for the purposes of this project. She would like to leave the meaning subjective to the viewer. So the diverse, creative, and innovative contributions of all the refugee claimant participants provides robust insights into their experiences of dignity, belonging, and well-being. And all of the findings that we have introduced exist both within independent system conditions while also being interlinked. Nothing is in vacuum. The interactions are mutually reinforcing, such as a government leader's change in mental modules might trigger a policy change, or they're counteracting. So scaling effective practices via government funding that is spread out amongst different systems may be thwarted by power relationships within stakeholders throughout the system. Systems change is not about achieving linear, sequential, and contained solutions for problems, as is often seen in traditional approaches to problem solving. Rather, the process includes ongoing processes of interrogation to expand successes and to shift the current undesirable state to a future desirable state. Moreover, as was mentioned earlier, the less explicit conditions may be the most challenging to clarify, but we believe that through creative writing, art, and innovative information sharing methods, we can make positive and huge impacts that will shift the systems. Therefore, we say that change makers must ensure that they pay sufficient attention to relationships, power dynamics, and the underlying mental modules, such as models, such as racism and gender bias that are embedded in the systems in which we work. So for example, the experience of crossing into Canada irregularly is connected to all 6 conditions. Through policies, the Safe Third Country Agreement has resulted in people not going through an official border crossing, at least one of the key reasons. Second, the rules and regulations and priorities of the RCMP and the CBSA have a significant impact on all aspects of the lives of the refugee claimant who they interact with. For example, will they be put into an immigration holding center, a process that has been proven to have a significant different experience for the refugee claimant to have a significantly different experience than those who are not detained. Resources flows are apparent within this example. How has money, people, knowledge, and information been distributed? Do people see themselves as illegal when they arrive in Canada? And what type of shame and fear comes along with these potential emotions? Relationships and connections are also apparent. How is the relationship between refugee claimants serving organizations and the CBSA? What will happen when the individual is released from the Immigration Holding Center? Will they receive mental health and other necessary supports while they are in the Immigration Holding Center and after release? Do they have relationships with lawyers in Canada already? Do they have family members, connections, and do they know their rights? We look at power dynamics. Who is holding the power, authority, and the formal, informal influence amongst individuals and organizations in this context? And finally, the mental modules, habits of thought. What are the deeply held beliefs and assumptions that are taken for granted as ways of operating the influence on how we work, what we do, and how we talk? What does it mean to be irregular versus illegal? Is there evidence to challenge the safe third country agreements? Are there alternatives to detention? So as you can see, there's examples of the structural change, there's space for relational change, and there's transformative change that is all apparent just within this one example. So as we move forward, there was 5 key actionable recommendations that emerged through our research. First, to drive meaningful leadership opportunities and new spaces for purposive, collaborative, and meaningful space for contribution with and for refugee claimants. Second, to enhance opportunities for meaningful creative expression and physical outlets. 3, to create an accessible communication strategy to engage the public and build an informed, strength-based awareness of refugee claimants in BC. 4th, to revisit refugee programs and ensure that refugee claimants are included and at the center, specifically English language programs. Who is eligible for LINK? Who is not? Mental health services and wraparound settlement support programs and housing. And finally, to work with government leaders and policymakers to revise the explicit structural forces, such as the Safe Third Country Agreement, use of immigrant holding centers, and processing times. What are the impacts of long work permit waits and refugee claim processes? So finally, we consider, what are our next steps in our future work? Well, the actionable recommendations provide a natural first step. We also see more opportunities for research with members of the wider Canadian population. If we truly want a mutually transformative experience, it's important that we have other voices at the table as well. We'd like to see additional research that's done with art at the basis of it. And finally, we do see, as Loren mentioned at the beginning, we recognize that when you look at the distribution of refugee claimants across Canada, the largest proportion is in the East. So what are the opportunities for scaling, for recreation, and for growth of projects and programs such as this? We'd also like to open up this discussion with everybody here today, because we're curious what your thoughts are and what steps there may be for future work. One piece I will say just before we move on is we do recognize some of the gaps in our research. So one would be the, for example, all of the interview participants are people who have either navigated the refugee claim system and received a positive decision, or they went through the review process and they received a positive decision at that point. Considering the many refugee claimants who were not successful are now as failed refugee claimants in their return to a different country. So it makes it difficult, and we would likely have gotten significantly different perspectives and understandings if our base included them as well. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll open it up to the wider group. Thank you. So I'll just ask you, Paulina and Dave, I don't have access to anyone in the wider group for any form of facilitated discussion. Will you be able to share any questions that may have emerged in the chat or relay any points?
Yes, for sure. Thank you very much, Alexandra, and everyone for the wonderful presentation. If someone from the participants would like to ask some questions or have some comments, please feel free to use the chat. I think it will be the best way to have your comments and questions. And I am checking also the feed loop. Let me check. I don't see questions or comments yet, so probably we will give everyone a couple of minutes. I don't know if someone else from the presenters would like to add something, or just to mention something else.
I wouldn't mind jumping in. I am curious about how the attendees feel about this type of creative project aimed at policy change, and how you think we can kind of take this approach forward. If anybody wants to comment on that. Maybe everybody is just so wowed by the findings and the amazing results, including the creative works.
I'll maybe jump in as a person who's been involved in the project, and thank you. Alexandra and Niwar have been the two researchers working on this, and we saw the recommendations, and I guess the larger question that I would ask of all of us in the room is do you see a place in your own, if you're involved with refugee claimants in your place in Canada, or yeah, how does this roll itself out? I guess these are broad, fairly broad recommendations, and what's one step that we could take, or even if we're involved with settlement organizations in reception housing for refugee claimants, how does this move forward, or where have you seen this working for yourself? It's another angle on the conversation.
This is when having in-person conferences is such a benefit. So what we will say as well, we'd love to hear from everyone here today. And if you have thoughts that do emerge later on, we do welcome them. Send us an email at 2 a.m. this morning when you can't sleep because you're so interested in more specific actionable recommendations, and we'll be happy to respond. But if anything comes up now, we're more than welcome and interested to hear.
Thank you very much for that. I will jump in just until someone else would like to say something. And actually, I worked for many years in Ecuador working with Colombian refugees mainly. And I can see all the benefits of your project that has been conducted here, but also I can see how it can be also applied to other type of contests. And one of the things that I always wonder, and this is following what Jenny and Loren were saying, is how the local communities can also embrace this type of studies. How as host communities, they play a crucial role in those three things that you were mentioning: the well-being, the belonging, dignity. Like I can, for my master's thesis, I conducted one year field work, interviewing three different refugees coming from 3 different places. And I could see how their well-being and their dignity really were shaped by how the local community embraced them or welcomed them. So I don't know, have you thought about that? Have you thought about involving local communities in this kind of project? And congratulations, it was really, really interesting. And thank you very much for doing that. I think when you are doing these kind of projects and when you're bringing art to all of us that are social researchers that are so used to words and and to, you know, written stuff, it's just wonderful to have that. So just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paulina. Absolutely, you bring up a great point, which is we've touched a bit on this research about the role of community bonding together and community bridging, and also transformative, like mutual transformation. So that does involve the roles of not only refugee claimant individuals, but people from the wider community. And that would definitely be, if this is a taste of what's to come, that would be a very natural next step, is what are the roles of people from the wider Canadian population? What are their interests, and how do they see themselves connecting and improving welcome for refugee claimants? And do they want that? There's so many things to explore. So thank you for that point. Absolutely. One thing that also struck me during this research process is the power of simplicity. There's a mix of large, very long prose and stories and poems, but also such meaning can be found in just 6 words. Yes, it was, but I can. So maybe we can leave it on this note for today. Yes, it was, but I can. A very powerful message from one of our refugee claimant poetry workshop participants.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. It is a very, very powerful statement. And if no one else from the participants would like to say something, I don't know if you would like to have some closing words, and then we can just close the session. Thank you for our presenters. Thank you all for the wonderful job, and thank you for the presentation. It was very beautiful. And I say beautiful because the poems, all the art that we have seen today is just amazing. So I don't know if you would like, some of the other presenters would like to have any closing notes, and then we can say goodbye by now.
I'll take the chance to jump in with one note, just speaking to some of the other threads and comments, I guess, that have come up. I just found this to be a very, really, as you've said, a beautiful project, but a beautiful example of how the research in the project itself can be some of those tentacles for that systems change. Mm-hmm. So it's not just that the output and the results we hope will lead to it, but it's also through doing the work that we are starting to shift some of those systems and structures. And, you know, we know as a team, I think we could have our own panel discussions about this over and over, but to speak to your question, Jenny, that you had put out to everyone, I love the use of the art methods in this project for that same reason. It's between the stories and the poems and the visuals, it continues to create materials that we can share and use as part of those mechanisms for future actions and for engagement. So it really shifts the way we use research to engage with community and engage with systems change. And I love it. So a little biased on the project, but.
And I think just to speak to the topic of this particular conference, Utopias of Practice, is that the title? I think when we saw that, and as we were working on this project, I mean, to imagine utopia for people who are seeking refugee protection, and for all of us, for our whole global population, where we know, based on predictions with, you know, climate disruption, the number of people on the move is only going to increase. And we've certainly seen that in the very narrow refugee protection UN Convention 1951 kind of framework. And so, yeah, I think it excites me about the potential, and this project, working with this group of people and the many others who are on the steering committee, just this sense of what is the possibility. And on the one hand, our news tends to frame things quite starkly and darkly, and we tend to pick up the fences and the razor wire and the patrols that are out to keep people from moving across towards safety. And yet here in Canada, like, the sky's the limit, really. I think we've got so much potential. And one way, we have this very privileged position of being far, far away, with 3 oceans surrounding us and a big neighbor down south. And so why don't we dream and just try things to the nth degree, and then push them out into the rest of the world? It may be utopic, but that's okay. Let's go there.
Yes, Loren, and I agree. And thank you very much for inviting us to dream, to do things right, to also, as Karen was saying, to bring up other issues to the conversation, but also other possibilities, other ways to do things. So thank you very, very much. I feel very honored and very blessed to be here today. And thank you very much for all the work that you have been doing. Keep working on that, and I will be following you to see what are the next steps and where are you taking us in the future, right? So good luck to everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Wow.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.